Now, we've talked about this character a lot on the channel. However, I think Harides, the mentor of Nami, who taught her weather during the time skip, and who seems to be the lead scientist on Weatheria, could be the father of Enel or Eneru of the Skypiea arc. Let me explain. So, the first thing that stands out to me is that oddly, they both wear blue. And that's not very important. That's just a very interesting thing to me based on how Oda dictates colors to characters, especially looking at Harides's second outfit. That's not his wizard outfit because he's wearing a cyan shade of blue and then a more traditional shade of blue. These two shades of blue can be found in Eneru's color scheme as he's wearing cyan and normal blue as well. That's just the first bit. The second bit is that both of them are Birkins. Both of them are wingless Birkins. If you don't know, a Birkin is a race of sky person in the world, and like Shandians or Lunarians or even Skypians, they have wings. But the Birkins have the second largest wings of the known winged races in One Piece, the first obviously being the Lunarians. So it's weird that both of them are wingless Birkins. Now, being wingless is often associated in being the deity or the king of a sky island, which I think both of them kinda are, because we know based on Eneru's past that he destroyed Burka. So based on Harides not having wings, he most likely was a former king of Burka. And thanks to Eneru's deity complex, he most likely removed his wings so he could be seen as a proper deity like the ones who have come before him. And we see this too in Gonfall, whom was the previous king of Skypiea before Eneru took over, and then he ascended to the throne again once Eneru made his way towards the fairy Verth, otherwise known as the moon. But what's also quite interesting in both of them being Birkins is that they are the only two characters in the entire series, save for maybe Nami herself and Usopp kinda, that are associated with the science of weather, because Harides is a weather researcher on Weatheria, and based on him being the only named weather researcher from Weatheria, I am of the belief that he's possibly the lead scientist, but he also is the one who teaches Nami about how to use weather as a weapon during the time skip. And the most important object on Weatheria are these weird plants that they grow in weather patches known as weather balls, in which these weather balls can contain any kind of weather. So with all that being said, we flip back over to Eneru, because Eneru quite oddly has modified his magnum opus called the Arc Maxim to produce thunderclouds in order for him to maximize the use of his Logia type Doa fruit called the Rumble fruit. And he does this not through dials, but through some strange concoction that we never really get to learn about. But it's very interesting that based on how he talks about the Arc Maxim, even though slave labor was used to build it, based on his intimate knowledge of how it works and how he can best utilize it, it's very clear that he knows about how to manipulate weather, which when you start to think about it and you really stop to think about where he comes from and how he's being presented here, you start to question, well, how did he come to these conclusions? Who taught him how to utilize weather in this way? I think his father, or possible father, Harides, was the one who taught him how to use weather in this way. And I can also believe, based on a conversation Harides has with Nami, he is referring to an island that we see on the Blue Sea that Uruge actually finds, whom is another sky person, called Raijin Island. And Raijin Island is an island that is often plagued with continuous lightning strikes. which makes me believe that possibly another Rumble fruit user before Eneru has permanently affected the island, not unlike how Kuzan and Sakazuki affected the sides of Punk Hazard, turning it into a molten wasteland and a tundra. So I could believe that a previous user of the Rumble fruit made Raijin Island how it is today. But in talking about the Raijin, it's quite interesting how Eneru is designed, because he is designed in a way in which he's a combination of aspects of the Raijin from Japanese folklore and a combination of elements that you find in various depictions of the Buddha. So it makes me think, perhaps, as he was under the tutelage of his father Haradis, maybe on Witheria or on Skypiea, various people that they could have run into over the years introduced Eneru to the concept of a Raijin and a Buddha, and he internalized those two visages into his own appearance. That's why he looks the way he looks now in One Piece, because we know that the Buddha is a figure in One Piece. Ivankov mentions it, and we have the human fruit model Great Buddha being used by Sengoku. So the Buddha is a known figure in the One Piece world, but I think probably outsiders introduced Eneru to the concept and he internalized it, which is why he looks the way he looks. So going off of that, what's also quite interesting about both of them is that both of them have this weird relationship with Nami. Of course, Haradis is the one who teaches Nami about the art of weather, but oddly, over the course of the Skypiea arc, Nami is the only one not struck down by Eneru. And weirdly, out of all the people on Skypiea at that time, other than maybe Luffy, and technically Robin, because he does look at Robin fondly for her archaeological prowess. But to continue, Eneru oddly respects Nami, as when she does dodge his lightning by parrying it with the abilities of the climate tech, he actually compliments her and saying, that's a good idea, creating a path for the lightning to pass through. You couldn't have done it if you didn't understand weather patterns. So he's praising her intelligence, and he also allows her to go with him on the Arc Maxim in the first place, which is pretty interesting because Haradis also takes a liking to Nami and teaches her the art of weather. So in that way, the two are similar, and it makes me think that they are father and son. So with that being said, too, and in talking about the Arc Maxim, both of them are oddly on gigantic flying vessels. The Arc Maxim is a creation of Eneru's own design and is able to fly to the moon via the electrical power that Eneru generates. However, what's also quite funny is that Witheria 2 is basically a big flying machine, even though it's just a sky island that rides on the winds of the world. But I find it funny that both of them find themselves in these big locations specifically designed for them, you could say, because Witheria is Haradis's research institute, and Eneru did commission for the Arc Maxim to be built to his specifications. So in that way, the two are similar in that regard as well. However, what's also quite interesting about these two is that they're both intelligent wingless Birkins who also just so happen to be associated with balls, and these balls are their crowning achievements in one way or another, because on Witheria, we don't know if Haradis created these himself, but the greatest invention of Witheria are something called the weather balls, which are these snow globe-like plants grown on Witheria that can contain different types of weather. And we see one that contains a storm cloud, which is quite interesting because Eneru himself, via the use of the Arc Maxim and the chemicals that it contains, is able to produce a bunch of storm clouds that he can manipulate with his Rumble fruit powers. Said storm clouds can form together in a giant sphere called a Rygo, and he uses said sphere as an ultimate attack to wipe out a sky island. So it's very interesting that spheres are associated with these two. Not only that, when he's not destroying islands, you can often find Eneru sitting atop a ball cloud created by a ball dial. These are often associated with sorcery. And like the weather balls of Vatheria, during the ordeal of balls, you could find various odd things hiding inside these cloud balls. So that's kind of interesting within itself. And then lastly, when having his first confrontation with Luffy, in order to get away from him, he encapsulated Luffy's arm with a giant golden ball and then kicked that golden ball off of his Arc Maxim. So it's very funny that the two, Haradas and Eneru, are associated with balls throughout both of their stories. And in both cases, both of their crowning achievements involve balls. So that's quite odd. But in addition, I do think Eneru had some sort of noble upbringing, because when you look at all the skills that Eneru displays over the course of the Skypiea arc, it's odd that no other character in One Piece is as accomplished as him, because he is an engineer, a metal worker, a chemist, an adept user of observation haki, and one of the few Logia fruit users in the series whom are able to combine haki with their abilities. He is also a polearms user and is an adept fighter in using his polearm weapon. On top of that, he is able to use his devil fruit in such an efficient way that not many characters can match throughout the series. So it brings me to think that he was perhaps trained under various tutors provided by his father Haradas, because it is my belief that Haradas was once the king or deity of Burka and then gave his son Eneru supposedly all these different opportunities, and perhaps even entrusted in him the Rumble fruit. But in talking about that, on a small sidebar, and spoilers for Elbaf, but in the mural in Elbaf, we do see the Arc Maxim, or at least a flying machine very similar to the Arc Maxim, and we do see lightning strikes around said Arc Maxim. So it is my belief too that, much like, say, the Dragon Fruit mythical model Nidhogg or the Human Fruit mythical model Nika, the Rumble Fruit must have some sort of cultural connotations to it in Burka, or it had cultural connotations to it in Burka before Eneru blew the whole island up. But to continue, Haradas provided all these opportunities to his son, the supposed Prince of Burka, so he could more efficiently study weather once he became of age. However, we know that to be not the case, as he went on a power trip and destroyed the entire island. So with all that being said, I do believe that the reason why Eneru is the way he is because he got so many opportunities and he was gifted and he was skilled, but then wasted them all on destruction so he could go after something called the Fairy Verth, which is also quite an interesting thing in hindsight, because who taught him about the Fairy Verth? This means he has some sort of historical background in something, because this information was relayed to him by somebody. And I think this information might have been relayed to him by one of the scholars that his father most likely provided. So it's weird that he's such a learned individual. Even with talking with Robin, he knew that the giant bell of Shandora was in the sky once the island from the Blue Sea got shot up into the Sky Islands to become the Upper Yar. So he even knew that. And that's 400 years removed from his timeline. But he knew the history of the bell. So it's weird that he's such a learned individual. But in talking about the Fairy Verth again, I think this could close the loop between Eneru and Haradas, because in Eneru's cover story, he takes some revenge out on some sky pirates for destroying his Arc Maxim. This revenge causes a big explosion to happen on the moon. Said explosion is observed by Dr. Tsukimi of Karakuri Island. Karakuri Island is the home island of Dr. Vegapunk. Dr. Vegapunk has been theorized and suggested to be an associate of Harides, as once the Egghead Island arc was over, the various Vegapunks that were left, now occupying the same body, called upon Harides and Witheria for assistance. So it's weird that Eneru caused the death of a doctor on Vegapunk's home island. Then Harides is then relied upon by that doctor and Dr. Vegapunk to house him in his time of need. And in both situations, a doctor from Karakuri Island has died technically, because Eneru's explosion caused Dr. Tsukimi's death, and Harides is housing the remnants of Vegapunk after Vegapunk Stella's death. It's also interesting because in both situations, the various inventions of both doctors do act on their creator's behalf. The various Vegapunk satellites are housing themselves on the behalf of Dr. Vegapunk, transporting the remnants of himself, which are punk records, to a safe location. And the automata go up to the moon to investigate what caused their creator's death. So I think that's a very interesting circle being created here, which could indeed connect Eneru to Harides. But with that being said, if you are enjoying the video so far, hit the like button. And if you want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button followed by that bell so you never miss a video. In addition, if you could, please hit the hype button because it does help. With that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. Whoops!